Hello everybody, welcome back to Humankind. So in case you missed it, earlier this week I released a video on Humankind's October Patch update and went through all of the changes that the developers shared with us in their community update. While we don't have the exact specific numbers associated with each change, they gave us a really broad speaking look at the changes. Here they are on screen if you really need a quick catch up, but just to give you the real quick and dirty, essentially we're looking at changes to the very early and very late game. The Neolithic Era will become more difficult, mammoths stronger, units more difficult to earn and maintain. Several cultures in between will be nerfed, including cultures that scale off population. The French, the Turks, for example, they're emblematic districts that scale with population. We're going to see those being nerfed. And then moving through into the late game, we're going to see technologies become more expensive and stability become slightly more of an issue than it is at the moment. At the moment, it's relatively easy, particularly in the late game if you've collected a lot of resources, for example, to keep your stability even. Those are, in general, the changes we're going to see to gameplay, and then there are going to be some broader changes to game settings, right? Things like the ability to disable pollution and turn limits, more features for colorblind players, i.e. you'll be able to actually really specifically change the color of every empire, plus some map settings. Resources will be easier or more difficult to earn based on how you tweak them. Max resources on a map or almost none, the choice will be ours. In this video though, I'm not going to take you through those announcements and those changes that I've just summarized. If you want the full detail, you can check out my previous video. This time, I want to give you my reflections and thoughts, and also reflecting on your feedback, because I ran a poll on the community channel page. These are the awesome features coming in Humankind's big October patch. Which one do you like the most? And also really got some really good feedback in the comments section on that video as well that I'd like to reflect on a little bit here as I discuss what I think we need to see a little bit more of and my response to the changes that we're getting and crucially the changes that we're not getting. Let's jump in. First and foremost, I should say that we don't have the full conclusive list of sweeping changes that are coming in this patch yet, and so it would be naive of me to assume that everything that's been announced so far is everything. There may be more, and Amplitude have said that there'll be a follow-up, smaller patch in early November, of course supporting ongoing work and wider future developments on larger game systems like religion. We know that's coming. I'm going to park that to one side and really delve into this October update. So when I polled you, you suggested that cultural balancing and new game settings, the ability to disable pollution, turn off a turn limit completely so you can have a truly endless game, were the two most important changes coming in the big October patch. And I do tend to agree. Very few people were particularly excited about the Neolithic Era population balancing. That's probably because it hasn't felt like a prominent issue for a lot of players, I get that. And some people were interested in late game technology costs going up. What I thought really piqued my interest, though, was the comments on the video. The most upvoted comments were largely around two things: cultural era stars, and then cultural affinities, abilities, right? Specifically, the collective mind's science ability that turns all other yields, well, industry and money anyway, into science, and then the land raiser ability that converts science and money into industry, right? Either of those abilities really allow you to hone in, and I thought that many of you captured that in your feedback. You know, for example, one comment said, "Wait, are they not nerfing builder and science affinities? That's the change I wanted the most." Another commenter said, "I'm very disappointed that they're not..." Siri, please. "I'm very disappointed that they're not doing something about the builder and scientist affinities. They're way too strong. You don't have to make late game techs more expensive, just need to nerf the avenues through which players currently blasting through." The comment goes on. My response initially would be to say that we don't necessarily know that those things aren't being tweaked, but the fact that the developers didn't mention them in their community post either means that they consider it to be a more minor change as to what's coming, they didn't have space to mention it, they forgot to mention it, or it's not coming, right? Could be all of those things, we don't know. Personally, and this is my thoughts and my reflections on the update, I think it's a change that absolutely needs to come. Those abilities are far too strong. I would disagree that late game techs don't also need to be increased. I think if we want to see some pacing changes, and credit to Amplitude, they are all over the comments and feedback around all of these issues, including game pacing, and that's something that they are aiming to address in this update and in future ones. You can see that in their feedback on the forums, on their Twitter, so on and so forth. So really credit to them on that. But back to the point, if we want to fix the pacing, then part of that we do need to see, I think, these late game technologies feel more impactful. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to up their cost, but I think it would be a quick way. Even just 10 or 20% could make a huge difference. Particularly on those bands of the technology tree where you can jump through one after the other quite quickly, right? Your particular one that jumps to mind, of course, is the obvious one along the bottom of the tech tree where you get to nuclear fission and nuclear reactors before you've even researched, say, electricity or power along other branches, right? If we could make those technologies really significantly, obviously, ludicrously expensive when you don't have some of the earlier ones, maybe there's a scaling element to it, I think that would go a long way to changing both the pacing but also the sort of feel of that final era. Does it feel powerful? Do these technologies feel significant? It's one way to do it. There are many others, but I think that you have hit the nail on the head, that an omission of really changing these cultural affinities would be a downside. Now, one of the things that they did mention that they are tweaking is more tweaks coming to the expansionist affinity, particularly that ability possibly being buffed and the era star requirements likely being reduced. As many of us will know, and I, by the way, completely agree with particularly that latter part, the expansionist stars are really, really challenging, particularly in the earlier eras, or if you're playing with any kind of restricted map, right, a smaller map, lower land space, whatever it may be, sometimes you just cannot earn them. And that limits, ultimately, potentially your ability to win the game, particularly on higher difficulties where every star matters. So that'll be great, really rebalancing for the entire game, not just expansionist cultures. But then when we delve into them, they've said that they're tweaking their ability. To be honest, and I sort of hinted at this a little bit in my coverage video, I feel like that is maybe not the most significant one, right? We could easily nerf these others first. Also, the merchant ability. Someone in the comments mentioned, like, how are they not touching the merchant ability? And in many ways, I tend to agree. I think also we may need to see some cultural balances, and this is probably the last thing that I'll reflect on here in this video because it's the real spicy thing, right? We need some more cultural balances, particularly, I believe, to some of the aesthete cultures, right? Here's looking at you, Olmex. You're not the only example, but you are one. These aesthete cultures are difficult to manage. Even a really powerful one like Joe is only powerful because of the science that it earns, right? It's not really even the aesthete ability or anything that empowers it. In fact, if anything, it hinders it. It hinders you as Joe that you're an aesthete culture because that's your main way to earn fame. You earn more fame from your aesthete stars because you're an aesthete culture. Yet the only reason why I really want to play you is because you're good at science. And that's because the aesthete culture is, I believe, not quite strong enough. And I think that is actually running through into the merchant ability as well. Potentially the aesthete ability, but I think that there are some use cases for that in really pushing out your societal pressure. So I think that one could potentially be left alone for now. But across the board, when we see these changes to how expansionist stars are earned, we could also see some changes to the cultural affinity abilities, particularly as you've mentioned the science and the production ones. I think that would go a great way to really shaping how cultures play out in humankind, and we might not need to get into districts just yet. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you when the patch comes out on the 28th of October.